you could pull that up, you can see everything that we have on site. So of the $41 million that we have to give to schools, there is $3 million of that, and it came from a 10% set aside that the agency could hold, but we gave this for special education. It will go out today as well. It's challenging. There were 2 applications, so I wanted something very, very streamlined, that we would have one application that would be very, very easy to access. We couldn't do it that way, so there are 2. Hopefully they will be easy to do. It's just duplicating a couple processes to be able to get that. The other part of the dollars are flowing out through pretty much the Title I look for all students. And we also, if there's any questions, anything going on with that, our experts are here for that. The shelf life of these dollars is, of course, 2 years. So for you to be able to use them, very flexible in about 12 different buckets and manners, that is accessible via the law, and we also have that on our website. And we are excited that Montana is one of the first states that is getting these dollars out to schools right away. These are not state dollars. Federal government has given these dollars specifically. Our job here at the OPI is to get them to you as quick as possible. There'll be other questions, I'm sure, that will be coming. We'll be doing some webinars. If you have any questions on appropriate use at all, we would be here to hopefully answer those questions for you. Just a great celebration, though. It is, we are into phase 2 at this point, even after all this time of uncertainty. And following the governor's directive of who we are at the agency, we're still willing to serve, even though we have a lot of our employees, about 95% of our employees are working remotely. But they are here to serve, they are here to help you in answering any of these questions that there might be at this time. So with that, I do believe we have Mr. Bailey on the phone.
Thank you, Superintendent. It doesn't look like Ken is on the line yet, but Jay, Jay, are you on the line and able to share your screen to walk us through eGrants?
Let's see.
Can you hear us, Jay? So those, the ESSER funds will be available, like the superintendent said today. That's why we're going to have Jay walk you through eGrants. It's got its own section in there. But until Jay is connected, does anyone have any questions or comments on the distribution of those ESSER funds while we wait for Jay?
Is Jack on the phone as well? So Jack may be able to answer some questions.
Jack is on
Jack, I'm on the line.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate that. Again, everyone, thank you for your patience as our technology here at the state level gets some kinks worked out. So Jack, I know you had a discussion this morning with Ken, and I do believe we're all ready. And looks like Jay says he needs to come back on. So Jack, anything that you would like to add to this?
Thanks, Superintendent Arson. One of the things that we had talked about was just how that equitable share setup is going to work for the non-public schools. And it's going to be set up pretty close to the normal Title I process. And districts have to notify all the non-public schools within their district boundaries about the opportunity for the non-public schools to participate under the CARES Act. And that is completely separate from the notifications that went out to all of the non-public schools back in March of this year about participating in federal programs, as they're two completely different pots of funding. So we started sending out notifications to district authorized representatives, county superintendents, and then principals who act like superintendents superintendents for districts, letting them know they had to notify all the non-publics, give them a link to our OPI website where we document and gather all of that information, and then let them know that there was a 10-day window by the time they sent the notices out to the non-publics, for the non-publics to reply whether they were going to participate or not. The form is fairly simple. Yes, we're going to participate in the CARES Act funding, and then the number of eligible students. Under normal Title I procedures, it's the number of low-income students who are eligible for Title I funds, but under the guidance from the Department of Education, that total number of students will be based on all of the students located who are attending any non-public school that is participating in the CARES Act funding. And then as Jay gets in and is able to demonstrate under the application that ESSER's program will actually calculate a proportional share of the funding that goes out to the non-public schools, and that's based on the enrollments of the total enrollment of the public school and then the total enrollment of the non-public school, and that'll bring up a proportional share that would go out to the non-publics as an aggregate, and then districts will actually have to calculate out manually how much would go to every individual non-public school, and Jay will be able to also show that in the program. So that would be a per pupil amount. So the program will calculate that. Districts will need to consult with any participating non-public who is going to be using CARES Act funds on what they can use those funds for, how those funds are going to be allocated out, and then they'll have to do the consultation forms and equitable share agreements, just like they do under Title I, to specifically lay out the plan. And that's kind of how the equitable share will work. One thing also to note is that a district can charge some administrative costs to the equitable share set aside under the CARES Act. It has to be reasonable. So say, for example, that the non-publics as a whole were getting $10,000 and the district wanted to charge, let's say, $1,000, for, their meetings and other costs associated with running the program, monitoring it, the counting, staff that they have to pay. That would be reasonable and acceptable. But if they said $5,000, charge to administrative costs, that wouldn't be reasonable, and that's something that we'll be monitoring here at the state. So that's kind of in a nutshell how the equitable share services are going to be given out. For program participation, that will follow the normal federal guidelines under Titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so that's how those services will be given. Remember, there's no cash payments to a non-public school. It's got to be in the forms of services and supplies, and then follow the normal requirements under federal law for working with non-publics. And that is the overview of the private school piece.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate that information. And it looks like we do have Jay, so we'll turn it over to Jay. You might still be muted.
There we go. There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Yes, great. Thanks. Yeah, my apologies for the technical difficulties. It seems like Zoom this morning needed to be updated, and so it was a mad rush. So good morning, everybody. It's definitely Monday, but real quick, I would run you guys through the ESSER applications. Like Superintendent Arnson had stated, and Jack, that we actually have 2 applications for the different pots of money. So most of you are probably familiar, your business clerks are familiar with the e-grant system itself. And so again, this is just a test system. And one quick disclosure that any of the dollar amounts you see in here is not reflective of an actual grant. There's just dollars that we put in there just for the presentation itself, okay? So I'm just gonna go ahead and log into the system. Within eGrants, with all of the business clerks or those who actually do the entry or the approvals, everything is under the eGrants Access and Select module, okay? In here in eGrants, we actually have, because it's based on a system, there's going to be 2 grantees within this application, but the high school is not the fiscal agent and the elementary is, and so there'll be a transferring of money over to the elementary, but they are the primary that will go in, actually complete the budget, do all the cash requests, excuse me, and any distributions over to the high school. So within here, we can select what grant year we're operating in, and this is going to be a 2020 grant. And this one, again, you can see these are all the actual grants that Great Falls would be participating in. The 2 new ones is going to be the ESSER Fund Grant and the ESSER Related Services Grant. The ESSER Fund Grant is that little over $37 million that's going to be the flow-through component, more related to the Title I activities. And then the ESSER related services grant, that's that $3 million set aside. That's going to be more targeted towards the needs of IDA kids. And so in here, if we walk in, we can open up the application. Okay. The first thing you're going to see is the overview tab. This is just really kind of a summary of what the program is, the purpose of the program, the use of the funds. You know, and this one is pretty clear that you got to make sure that these funds are used to prevent, prepare for, or respond to coronavirus. Okay. The grant period, which is when those funds can actually be utilized. And so the Department of Education did give us some guidance, and school LEAs will have up until September 30th, 2022 to fully obligate those funds. And then we'll need to have them liquidated with OPI by November 10th on 2022, which is the date of the final expenditure report. This also represents any legislation that's applicable, and then guidance that's related to the funds themselves. Contact information, this is where the district clerk or the authorized rep is noted. These are the folks that have the ability to go in there, actually enter in any of the budget activities, submit and do any cash requests, submit those. And then the authorized representative is used to identify that person that has the authority to go in there and approve the budget or any of those cash requests that are submitted. In the allocations tab, this is going to show the total amount of the funding for the LEA. You can see here that there's 1.8 million that's going to be going. Again, this is to the elementary. If there are any things that's like a reallocated where, let's say, a program has not expended all their funds and the Office of Public Instruction has determined that they may not need those, and the school agrees, we can, what do they call, release the funds and take it away from one of the grantees and actually reallocate it to another school. And if it's something that comes that's outside of your general grant, that's where that would be reflected. The system is, you guys know, a lot of you, that it also allows us to carry, to track carryover funding. You know, a lot of the Department of Education grants has what's called a tiding provision, which allows up to 2 years to actually expend the money. This is the subtotal. Again, this is just for the elementary. As I noted earlier, that this is a system, and because the high school is part of that system, but they're not the fiscal agent, their funds are actually going to be transferred out of their budget and their application, and it'll be transferred into the elementary's budget where they can actually budget those amounts. And then we have the total amount that's going to be awarded to both the high school and elementary, which is the $2.3 million. And this is the basis of what they're going to use for when you're going to create your budget. Under program detail, this is going to be a pretty important tab. The allowable uses, this is data, the information that came directly out of the CARES Act of the uses of the ESSER funding. And so it's important that we look at these and make sure that when you're designing your budgets or how you're actually going to allocate those funds out, you know, to prevent or prepare for and to respond to coronavirus, you know, how those activities are going to relate to that. As Jack had said, there is an equitable services component of it, which is based on enrollment. The system itself will automatically calculate that based on the information that you enter. So here's the total amount that came over from the allocations tab. Current amount available is the 2.3. If there's any indirect cost amounts they're going to back out, they can do it there. So the total amount of funds would be the 2.3. The school then would go in and enter in for any of the participants of the private and non-public schools the enrollment numbers for each one of them, whether it's the elementary versus the high school, and it'll give the total amount. Then they need to enter in what the actual district's enrollment is for its PK through 12. And then the system will calculate out the percentage of the equitable services. So on this one, of the 2.3, $76,000 needs to be made available for the equitable share for the private non-publics. Once you've completed that, they'll go in and you can do the budget pages. And this is where you'll actually start going in and using specific object codes and the purpose categories of how you're going to spend those monies. And so an example of, you know, object code 100 is personal services. Object code 200, that's your fringe benefits. 3 is going to be your technical and supplies. And if you're not sure about which object codes each one is, there's actually over on the budget summary, it breaks out in more detail each one of those categories or buckets of money where you can actually budget those funds for. And then the actual purpose category of the type, a little more in-depth detail of how those funds will be used. And so as the budget is filled out and completed, the system has to make sure that if you have $2.3 million available, that you have budgeted and allocated out that full amount. Down here under the allocation remaining, if that has any dollars in it, if you try to save the page, it'll come up with an error message because you need to go ahead and finish allocating out the rest of it. And then over here, it'll show that if you have an indirect cost rate, approved indirect cost rate from OPI, you can put that in there and draw indirects on a part of that, of those funds. Okay. Again, on the budget summary tab, once you've completed the budget detail, this will just summarize everything and how all those funds are going to be expended by each one of the categories. Again, this is a $2.3 million, a lot of money for remote learning, but just for the purposes of this exercise, we just added in some numbers for you. And this shows the total amount that was allocated. The assurances in common and program, these are going to be, most of you will be familiar with these. These are common assurances that apply across any of the federal grants by the Department of Education, really just general and fiscal controls, participation, the gun and free schools, the Department of Suspension. Again, these are just the same as all the others. ESSER assurances, these are going to be 2 questions that the OPI is going to ask the LEA to complete, really to do a quick description of how those funds are going to be used to support. And the second one is if there's anything that OPI, in the form of technical assistance that we could provide to the district, we're asking that you guys put that out there so we have the ability to target, understand what kind of services or technical support that OPI can provide you guys in this process. And then the very bottom, again, this is just some more of the assurances that you're attesting to make sure that you adhere to when you're actually expending the funds, okay? And by checking this, you're going to agree to it, and then you'll say that GEPA assurances. So under the CARES Act, it references GEPA 427, which states that for the funds that they have to make sure they ensure equitable access to and participation in CARES Act program for students, teachers, other program beneficiaries with special needs. And they want you to focus on the 6 types, which is the gender, race, national origin, color, disability, or age. And this one's actually a pretty common one across all the grants as well. And then 442 is really just an extension of some of the common assurances, but GEPA has like specific language, and so we included that in there for you guys to review and attest to as well. Once you've actually confirmed and agreed to all the assurances, the final assurances tab will show here that you have done that and that you agree to everything that's listed out there. And so that's pretty much the application itself. As for like if you later on in the year, if you need to do an amendment, and the amendment deadline is September 1st of 2020, you can go out here and actually initiate one. Once this is actually approved and been submitted, then you'll have an amendment tab out here. Because this one hasn't been completed fully, it's not out there. And then once the application itself is ready to submit, this is where the authorized rep will come in. They can do a consistency check. The system will look to see if there's any errors or concerns. If it brings one up, you have to rectify that before it allow you to actually submit the application. And then the actual application print, that's just if you want to like do the whole thing once it's all completed and submitted. Okay. And so real quick, the ESSER related services grant will be almost identical. It's going to have your same overview, same contacts, allocations. Again, it'll have the same type of information if there's any type of transfers in or outs, depending on which LEA you're looking at. Non-public, again, same thing, calculation based on the enrollment numbers. But if you notice here, you're going to start to see that there's more IDA specific language, so we're identifying those kids with special needs. And again, this would be just the same where you need to go in there and you enter in each one of the schools that are going to participate, the amount of enrollment students that they have, and that's what's used to actually calculate the proportionate share. Same with budget, same thing with the budget summary. The one key thing I will show you on here is that the assurances, please make sure that you guys are reading this, because with since it's ESSER, it's going to have the same 2 questions, but the actual compliance requirements are going to be different. They're going to be more towards the Individual Disabilities Education Act. Okay. And again, GEPA assurances will be the same there. So I know that's a pretty quick run through. I guess I can open it up if anybody has questions about the application, then I'm happy to answer any of those.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate that. There were a couple of questions about when this will be open for superintendents to go access it.
Okay, let me show you. It's actually open right now. It opened today. Can you guys see those dates?
Yes.
So what we have is June 1st, today at 10 a.m. is when the applications have opened. We're going to keep the applications open all the way through June 30th, and we'll close at 11:59 p.m. June 22nd will be the first time that LEAs can actually go in and submit a cash request. Now, let me note that this is a very small window. It's only 2 days to actually enter in cash requests. And part of the reason for that is that for those of you that are familiar with our payment schedule, we don't make any payments in July because of the state fiscal year end closing. And so we still want an opportunity for schools to go ahead and get out there. If there's any current year expenditures that they want to get reimbursed for so they don't have to do a prior period adjustment, this makes that available. And we'll make the actual distribution, the first one on June 26th. Okay. And then we talked about actually if you have submitted a budget and in that time frame before September 1st, you decide that you really need to do a realignment of how you allocate out those funds, then you have until September 1st to submit that amendment to us. And
Thanks,
then
Jay.
just general dates.
Thanks, Jay.
Yep.
Can
Yep.
you,
Just general dates.
Can you
Oh, go ahead.
see the questions in the chat and kind of respond to those as they come?
Let me see here if I can see them. Hold on. So it doesn't show that it's showing up. Okay. Let's see here. Regarding enrollment numbers for private non-public, are we accounting for every student attending private or only those who are previously identified? Sorry guys, it's jumping. I think Jack just answered that, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Questions on there's on the grants.
Jack, you want to take this one? Does the money go to non-public schools if they responded to the federal funding help through the public school?
Thanks, Jay. If the district or if the non-public school was participating in federal programs previously, that's completely separate from the CARES Act funding. So it would be, they would, the notice to intend to participate in federal funds, which would be Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, CTE, and some of the other programs. That went out back in March. So you have to basically do this whole process again for the CARES Act funding because it's a different pot of money. I think that answers the question.
Thanks, Jack. And I apologize if anyone's getting feedback on our end. But we do have about 239 people on the call, so the chat might be the best spot to post questions, but also feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment.
So it looks like someone did have they were able to see it out there, so good. Okay.
So Jay, where is the form located to notify private schools on the website?
So Jack would have that answer.
So this is Jack, and I'm actually responding in chat now. The forms that go out to the districts, or go out from the districts to the non-public schools about participating in CARES Act, and then the forms for the district to fill out are on the OPI private school web application page, and I'll get that in my response here quickly. And then the notification for districts for the consultation and then what services are going to be provided are also on the OPI website, and I will have that also in the response here in a few seconds.
Thanks, Jack. Are there any other questions or comments for Jack or Jay? If not, we can have Ken start walking through the website a little bit. What is the first date to obligate the funds?
So the funds themselves actually go back to the beginning of it was, Ken, you can correct me on this, was March?
March 13th.
13th, that's right, yeah. So any expenses that were incurred and obligated from the 13th forward, you can go back retroactively. Now, the one thing about this funding that's important is that the supplement versus supplant provision does not exist for this. And the intention of the funding is, in fact, to help make the districts whole. And so, again, think about the source of those fundings. It's not the same federal requirement.
Thanks, Jay. And what date for enrollment do they use?
Jack, you have that one?
I think I was told at one time that we were preloading the district enrollments into the application. Not sure if that's true. That's what I was told. And then for the non-publics, it'll be the enrollment on or before March 13th.
Yeah, you're right. It's for the school's enrollment. We used what was previously loaded in from the Title I application. So.
Great. Well, at this time, I think we'll turn it over to Ken.
Hey, good morning. I hope everyone's doing okay. What I'm going to do is kind of go back to the beginning and say, here's where you go on our website to find the information, the guidance that we've published and everything, and make sure everyone has that. And then there are just a couple of issues that I'll add to that Jack and Jay haven't touched on. So let me try and share my screen here. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. So if you go to the main section here, and of course I went to the wrong place. Let me go back. What you want to click on is the opening Montana schools. I apologize. So if you go to reopening Montana schools, and there's obviously data down here, and down below is a menu that says school. One of the choices is school finance. And again, there's some data that's listed, but the main thing to me is to go to the ESSER info, the big blue button. And this is the page where you'll find all of the documents that we've created. If you click on the guidance, it will take you to it. And I just want to point out at the top that everywhere anytime we go in and modify one of these documents, we kind of keep a log here at the very top. So anytime we modify one of these documents, we log it so that it's available to see what it is that we've done. And again, as you go through here, this is all of the guidance that we created on the basis of what we got from the department and our understanding. And it's kind of organized, you know, like the very first thing is looking at the uses of ESSER funds. And a very important thing to remember, it's in the eGrants application. One of the certifications that you're going to make is that the grants be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. So that's one of the first key things to think about is for the expenditure making, can you relate it to the coronavirus disruption? Then as has been said and is repeated in eGrants, there is a section that comes directly out of the act that shows all okay, here we go again. And I won't go through the rest of this, but basically this is the main guidance document that you want to go to. If you go again back here, the district allocations. And this is where you will see the allocations. Like I think I saw one of the questions is, you know, if you're a high school and elementary, how does that work? And there is an allocation that goes down to the district level. And again, at the very bottom here, you will notice that there is a log of revisions. And in fact, we have another revision that we'll post today because when we opened up eGrants, we discovered we had to have everything rounded to whole dollars. So again, we'll modify this and show it with whole dollars. it's possible that a district's allocation could change by $1, but that's the most it would be. And then the last guidance document that we have over here, maybe not as clearly stated as it could be what it is, but this is the guidance document that that is really for the people in your business office, that talks about how to record the receipt of funds and then the expenditure funds for this grant. And down below, like we talked about, we have 2 FAQ documents. These link directly to the Department of Education's website because these are their frequently asked questions. And we basically just link to them, and we have used these as the basis for the guidance that we've created and for how we're administering the program. So let me pause there. Is it clear where you can find the guidance and the documents? And I don't have my chat room up anymore, so I'm not seeing what questions are coming in. Let me do that.
Thanks, Ken. And I apologize if you weren't able to see the documents actually open up. Ken is probably still operating under the old version of Zoom. But I'm just going through the chat, Ken, to see if there's any questions. So Ken, there's a question about the ESSER related funds passing on to the SPED co-ops. Do you want to address how that works?
Right. So in the $3 million allocation, that money was allocated to school districts using the formula that we use for the state funding for the Related Services Block Grant. For those schools that belong to a special ed co-op, those funds will pass directly to the co-op, similar to the way that IDEA works. So the district will have to go in and apply for those funds. It will go to the co-op to basically approve all those, and the funds will be made available directly to the co-op then. Unfortunately, a part that you still have to consider is that for that grant, equitable services are still due to private schools. But again, this is all part of the CARES amount. So for that amount that's going to the co-ops, you still have to add that to the total in terms of how much inequitable services do you owe to the private schools. But the services provided do not have to be special ed. Again, because of the restrictions, it just adds to the total amount in the negotiation that you do with the private schools of agreeing on what is appropriate.
Thanks, Ken. And just everyone in the Zoom session here, we will be recording this as well as the chat box. So if we don't get to any of your questions on this call, we'll be sure and respond to all the questions in an email follow-up. But Ken, there's a question about the application. Will there be 3 separate applications or just one application for all 3 fiscal years?
And I'm actually going to defer that to Jay on how, I think the application is for the entire grant. But Jay, can you answer that? Is Jay still with us?
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. Yeah, so it's just one application for the entire grant period. And so it runs from today all the way through, like I said, till September of 2022 to obligate those funds and then fully liquidate by November 10th of 2022.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.
And to address the question on the equitable share difference between CARES and the normal Title I, we're following the federal guidance as it currently exists so that the state doesn't have any liability or individual districts don't have any liability. However, if that guidance changes, then we will notify you. Let's see.
There is a topic I want to address that, and again, it might generate some questions and things. So we as an agency were audited back in September by the federal government. And one of the findings that were there was that we didn't do enough in what's called risk assessment. You know, in the past, we look at only the single audit schools and have a couple that have bad audits, and we assign a high risk status to and set some conditions, like sometimes we only reimburse invoices as opposed to general invoices or general cash requests. So we have kind of taken a shot at trying to comply with what the federal government wants us to do with this grant. So as opposed to the single audit schools, we looked at all of the audits that we have for all size schools. And using the same kind of point category that we do for assigning risk, we did this for all the schools. And for those, again, schools that are in a high risk category, or we also have a watch category. And if they're in the watch category and are getting more than $50,000, you will see in the GAN for this award that you're being given high risk status, or risky status, I guess is the better way to put it. And we're trying to approach this with a very soft touch, because the only requirement that we will put on schools, and we have to do this according to the federal government, and soon you'll see this with all of our federal grants. All we're saying for it is that every time there's a cash draw, the grant manager, who is me, has to actually look at the cash draw request. And that once a quarter, because there will be quarterly reporting that comes out of this, for those schools, I will give the business manager or equivalent for that school a call and just have a conversation that says, how's the grant going? Are there any issues? And if I see any issues, I'll discuss it at that time. But that's all that risk assignment means. There's no requirement that you do something special, like only submitting invoices for materials and that kind of thing. And it's new, and it's developing. Again, at some point this will apply to all federal grants, but we're partly doing this because we believe that when auditors get instructions from the federal government this coming year, that it is almost guaranteed that they will want to look at this grant. And so therefore we're trying to prepare ourselves, but help you prepare as well to understand what that means in terms of an auditor showing up. The second thing that I want to do and just emphasize for you is Jay talked about putting a cash request in a very short time period. It's in June, I think it's June 22nd to June 24th. And I think this is important because it will help schools with their accounting if they're able to go and look at all the expenditures they've had this year that could mean reimbursement from the ESSER funds all the way back to March 13th, and prepare the cash request and get it and account for it, and then move into each school's year-end close, having already accounted for it. It is possible to do this through accruals, but it kind of messes up your year-end close a bit. So again, when we did this, we made sure that we had at least a chance. And again, it is a short window, but if you've got expenses that should be reimbursed out of these funds, again, the suggestion is you try to get that pulled together into a cash request by June 22nd so that we can give it to you in this fiscal year. So let me pause there and see if there are other questions that have come up for this.
Thanks, Ken. And if there are any questions as you're going through eGrants to access these funds, Jay Phillips is our operations director who oversees eGrants. You can call or email him with any questions. And if you have any questions about the equitable services provision, that would go to Jack O'Connor. So Jay and Jack, can you please post your phone numbers and emails one more time in the chat so everyone has it? and I'll share them in an email afterwards as well. Are there any other questions or comments at this time? So Jay or Jack, do you maybe want to touch on Lori's question one more time about the distribution of equitable services?
This is Jack. Districts will get the amount of overall CARES Act funding under both buckets. They will put the numbers in eGrants. It'll calculate the equitable share, and then districts will be responsible for making sure that they've contacted all the non-publics and set up the programs that they're going to operate and how much those are going to cost, and then they will directly pay for those costs out of the set aside amount. The OPI will just be looking at it to make sure that the expenditures are done according to the uniform grant guidance.
Thanks, Jack. Do food service and transportation costs qualify? Yeah, anything that's related to preventing, responding to, or preparing for the coronavirus is eligible. And we know that food service and transportation services were very heavily impacted by the COVID-19 outbreak. So as long as you're accounting for those costs and justifying them as a response to COVID, they would be covered, yes. Is there anything you want to add on that, Ken or Jay?
No, I agree with that. Yep.
Again, I think that the 12 purposes to which the money can be used has at the end other activities that are necessary to maintain the operation of and continuity of services and LEAs and continuing to employ existing staff of the LEA. So again, I think that the intent is to be fairly broad, with the idea though that it has to relate to disruptions from the coronavirus.
Thanks, Ken. Jay, do you want to touch on the amendment deadline? And is that going to be expanded for future fiscal years? See Chad Johnson's question.
Yeah, so the first round will be that September 1st of 2020, but by all means, I think that's something we haven't honestly evaluated whether we're going to need to extend that out. I think we'll wait and see kind of how the funds are being distributed out, how quickly, and if it looks like that we're hearing out from the field that we need to have another amendment period available, then we could definitely do that.
Thanks, Jay. So we'll look at that more. Jack, can you touch a little bit on how the homeschool equitable services work? Oh, looks like you just did.
Homeschools are considered private schools in Montana as per state law, so they have to be notified just the same as any brick and mortar private school.
Thanks, Jack. And the county superintendents hold that information on homeschool students, correct?
Yeah, correct. All private schools and homeschools have to register yearly with the county superintendent of schools. We did have the county superintendents do an update here a couple of weeks ago because they only usually update their districts in our OPI private school web application in October of each year. But we did have them go back and update it for any private school or homeschool that came into existence between October of 2019 and March 13th of 2020. So the list should be updated.
Thanks, Jack. And then there's a question from Alyssa about education cooperatives. Ken, do you want to touch on that? Would they have to work with the district?
So for the pot of money that is allocated for special ed related services, again, those funds are allocated on a district level, but for all districts that are members of a co-op, the funds will go to the co-op. And so there is a step that the co-op has to take in e-grants to approve all the funding and use the funding directly. It is still possible for co-op to work with their member districts if there are additional if there are additional needs that go beyond what comes out of that pot, school districts can certainly spend the main ESSER allocation funds on special ed related needs associated with coronavirus, and could also work with their co-ops in order to provide those services.
Yeah, and let me add one thing real quick. The co-ops themselves, they have to submit a member application just like they do with their IDEA funds.
Right.
Thanks. So there's a couple of questions that came in here regarding who's charged with making those outreach to non-public students. Do you want to touch on that, Jack?
Yeah, I was just responding. So private and non-public schools, they're required by law to contact the county superintendents, and then the county superintendents upload that information into that database that we have on the OPI website. Then districts can go into that application, and then they can find all of the names, addresses, and contact information of all the non-publics that reside within their district boundaries. And then the districts are required to contact each of the non-public schools and let them know about their opportunity to participate in the CARES Act funding. And then on the page in the OPI web application, there's a memo to districts explaining the process, what needs to be done. There's sample language for a letter to go out to the non-public schools. And then there's a form for the non-public schools to fill out and return to the districts stating whether they're going to participate or not, and then the number of students that they have.
Thanks, Jack. And then Alyssa's question was actually directed to regular education co-ops, not special education co-ops. So Ken, would that be an MOU with the district, or how does that work?
Right, there's nothing in our allocations for money going directly to co-ops who are not special ed co-ops. So each co-op would have to work with their districts if they want to receive any of the ESSER funds.
Thanks. There's been a couple questions about due dates here. So Jay, can you go through those major due dates again? The 6/5/2020, 6/30/2020.
Yeah, let me just share this real quick one more time. Maybe. Let's see here. Okay, so the application again opens today. You have until June 30th of 2020, 11:59 p.m. for the applications to be submitted. June 22nd is the first date that you can actually submit a cash request. And then again, the 24th is when the submission for that first payment closes. And we will make a payment out to be hitting the banks on June 26th.
Thanks, Jay. Just monitoring the chat. Jay, can you talk a little bit about this amendment process and how it's different from traditional title programs or other federal grants?
So the amendment process would be it'd be identical. It's just it's your opportunity to go in there that in the event that you need to realign your budget, you can do that. The same provisions in each one of the object categories that allows you to spend up to 50% of that pot without doing an amendment also apply. And so again, it's just the same type of application that we have with all of our other grants.
Great. Are there other questions or comments at this time? Like I said, we have saved the chat, and we'll go through and make sure that all the questions get answered, as well as the recording for this Zoom session. But we'll wait we are coming up on the hour. Okay, sorry, I was just looking at the chat. We are coming up on the hour, but I'll wait another minute or two if there's any other questions or comments. Jay, do you want to take that question? Does the application have to be approved before a cash request can be submitted?
Yes, it does. So it's just like any other process. You have to have a fully approved application, and then you can start to draw down the funds. Yep.
Well, like I said, I'll be sure and share Jay and Jack's contact information with you so you can reach out if you have questions as you're going through eGrants. And to Dorothea's question, yes, we can do that. Superintendent, do you have any closing remarks?
Just want to say thank you for your patience today, as technology was just a little bit of a barrier. I want to say congratulations as well to a school year. It was quite interesting, let's put it that way, quite different. I know you all serve our children, and I thank you very much for everything that you have done. But everything that you're going to be doing as you open up this application, we're here to help. We have experts, and if we don't have an answer, we'll find you one. And I trust you that you have every availability that you can, and your resources, use these dollars to deploy to protect our children going forward as our school doors open again. So with that, everyone stay healthy, wish you all the best, and we're here to serve. Thank you so much.